So in Maya, if you want to edit UVs, you go up here to UV editor and open it like this, and you have your entire UV editor. Or what I like to do is go up here and say UV editing workspace, and I have everything in the same window instantly. And here's my toolkit. Now, to create seams, you have to open cut and sew. And then you select your edge and say cut. Or just right click here and drag to cut. After you're done cutting, select UV shells like this, or going up here and selecting these. So I selected this shell, and I can unwrap it here with unfold, so I unfold it. I can also unfold it along the U or the V separately. If usually the island rotates like this, I can say straighten shell. It's best practice to select, for example, this UV selection, and if I have this island like this, then I can straighten shell as well and use these commands. So now I've straightened the UVs and made it better usable this way. You know the drill. So after you have everything, just select everything, and if you want to pack, you go down here to layout, and then it packs your UVs for you. Maya has this great tool regarding textile density. So for example, if our islands are rotated like this, and you want to precisely rotate, you just use this tool. And if you want to get textile density, let's say it's like this, you click on an island and say get, and then you click on the other island and say set. Or you can, let's say, get from this one and set everything else, or select everything and say set. And here you input your map size, and you can actually, this is based on pixel per unit, but if you're more of a visual person, you'll just look at the squares on the texture. All commands regarding the display of this window are up here. So now you can see the stretchings. For example, if I drag this vert out, by the way, this is very important. So this is vertice mode, and if it's a shared vert from across a seam, you move them both at the same time. To move the UV vert, you have to go up here to UV selection, and now you're actually selecting a vert on this island only. Even if it would touch this one, it's not moving that one. So let me see, I'm stretching this out now, and you can see the stretching in this mode. So this mode shows stretching, and you can turn it on like this, see the texture better, or what's selected. You can also add an image here if you have a texture, and adjust its opacity, snapping, and so on. So just explore this menu for any type of UV options. You can also use this create UVs tab, for example, which is great because many times Maya always says that something is non-manifold and it can't use your UVs that you already have, or I mean, you can't unwrap certain things and it keeps going crazy. Just create a camera-based UV and then start unwrapping. So always start with a camera-based UV and then start unwrapping. And if it still says it's manifold, you should go through the cleanup and then check if you have errors, and just start with the camera-based map and then unfold from there, because Maya can go crazy with the UVs that way. So let me just unwrap this like this, quick. Cut, select everything, unfold, optimize, always press optimize, layout. I'm orienting my shells and layout again. And now I have this super unstretched great version. See, as little stretching as possible. You can also stack similar islands and stack and orient to edge and gather shells and stack shells regardless and things like that. So Maya is a really good unwrapping tool. You just have to explore these menus here and it will be super fast in this regard. You control your UV sets down here and you copy or create an empty one. Be careful with renaming these. Also, sometimes if you have two objects and one has a different map, so let me just rename this and say crazy map, and this other one has two maps, right? And now if I combine these objects, right click, it successfully added my first map to the other ones, but sometimes it gets lost and it just ruins the maps here and everything. So be careful with this. If it does, just rename your maps to have the same name and it will combine them as well. Otherwise, this menu is very simple.
Okay, let's talk about UVs in Max. So to use UVs in Max, you have to use an unwrap UV modifier as one would expect to use UVs. So go to your modifier list and find unwrap UVW. So this is the editor. For the UVs, you open UV editor right here. And because this was a cube, it has some UVs. So if I want to use these, I'll go into face mode, for example, select all, and here down in arrange elements, I say back together, and this goes outside the 0, 1 space. I can say pack normalize, which it sends it back to 0, 1 space. And I say pack custom, which will use this padding and everything I set, and it will take it into consideration. So now if I press it again, see it has padding. If I normalize it, it will pad it along the borders as well. Rescale as elements is actually average island scale. Now there are a lot of buttons here in the UV editor, as in any UV editor. In this case, I used the UVs that were already present, but if I go up here and say texture or checker pattern, which will give this checker pattern to me, we can see that it's not really unwrapped correctly, but we already know that. So to unwrap, you say relax until flat, relax custom, or straighten selection. In my case, I don't need to straighten anything because this is a cube, so I'll say relax until flat. This is the unfold button in Max. And now I'll pack it again, normalize, and it looks like this. And it's quite visible in the checker that there is no stretching and everything looks as it should. But I don't really like these UV seams, and we'll get into how to handle them. So I go into edge mode and select my edge and say stitch to custom. And now I have these two islands. And I don't understand why it keeps on selecting everything. So let me just close this real quick. I'll collapse this, and now I have my UVs as I set them. That's how you actually save your UVs, by collapsing them. So I'll reapply the modifier just because Max is bugging me out. And now I can select elements without it selecting the whole island. Okay, so if I want to stitch islands together, let's say this edge, I can select it here and say stitch custom, and it will move to that island, and I can move it off to the side now. It looks much better. Or if I say stitch to source, it will do this, stitch to average, and stitch to target, and so on. I always hate these options, so I just say stitch custom, select this edge, stitch custom again, and I have my island. Now I just relax it again, clicking this button as many times as I want, or by holding down the mouse, it will pop this menu up, and you have this cog icon. And if you press it, it will open the tool which you're using, and you can actually increase iterations and adjust settings for it. So these are the classic Max algorithms, and this is the latest one, which I recommend you use anyway. And now if I press relax until flat, it will say compute here, down here, and sometimes you have to wait an absurd amount, and you can interrupt it by pressing escape, and you won't have to wait, it will still apply something. So this is the unfold that's applied. Let me select everything and say rescale elements. Normalize, and so on. Let me just introduce some padding here. I don't know why that went away. Oh yeah, because I collapsed it. Okay. So now we have this good unwrap. You need to reselect this again to refresh it, so on. So now if I move this, you can see it updates. Okay. Now let's say we don't have UVs. Let's say everything is one UV island, or it's all jumbled up. For example, we use a kind of projection mapping. So in the modifier panel, I will select UVW map, and this is your classic projection mapping style of mapping in Max. So it doesn't work from the UV editor window as you normally expect coming from a different program. So I'll just choose some absurd thing here that will destroy everything, like spherical. And if I go under here and select gizmo, I'll make it larger. I'll turn it around something like this. I can modify this. Okay, and now if I collapse this, or I don't even need to collapse it, I'll just put another unwrap UV modifier on top. And now I have some seams like this, and it's absurd. I have to UV unwrap from the start. Now I made this object with unwrapping in mind. So let's say you start from some kind of destroyed object like this or sphere, and you want to start UVing manually like you would, or introducing seams. Now Max doesn't really use the seam technique. It can, but it's much better to focus on smoothing groups, materials, face angles, and so on. So let's say you would like to create a seam like this, like you would do in Maya or Blender, and you would say convert edge selection to seams. And it turned blue in the viewport, but nothing else happened. Nothing happened here in the editor. And you do it again because you think it's bugged or in hopes of something. So convert edge and you say, okay, edit seams or something. Oh, you have to undo. Nothing happens. And you see these peel mode buttons here because it's in the same small window. And you say, okay, let's select everything and say quick peel. But it's still ignoring whatever you did before. When you say peel mode, and nothing happens because you're in kind of a selection mode. So reset peel, yet still nothing happens. You exit peel mode by giving up, and you go into pelt map, and you say, this is where it is. Start pelt. Okay, you're stretching this, and you see the relax button. Things go crazy. You reset. You hope for the best. Starts looking even worse than you started. You go to the options. You select the stretcher. You start moving things around. You're afraid of what happens next when you press the button. You start peel again. Nothing happens. You start relax. Nothing happens. You say, okay, stop this nonsense. Press the escape button. Max is about to crash. And you just wait. With a void in your stomach. In anticipation of what happens next. Okay, I actually waited for I don't know how many minutes, but I'll see in the recording. So after you freak out and it finally stops, you press commit and see what happened. And you're obviously not satisfied. Then you take my advice and say you ignore this entire panel except for a few things, which are select by angle, smoothing group, and this projection part here where if I select by angle and select this face, for example, I can say project planar map. And now I can move the map. And if I go to perspective view like this, it doesn't really matter. And let's say you say box map and everything that is selected, you say box map again. And ooh, something actually good happened this time. And you say fit and center and align and so on. And you actually use these mappings to your advantage and something better happens and you can work from this and go to arrange elements again and go back where we were when I started the tutorial. But let's say you don't want to use projection mapping, which you used and you're satisfied and now you go out of it because you can't exit otherwise. And you just undo, and reproject just to ruin everything so I can have a better example. Now, let's say I have something crazy like this. This sadly doesn't work like edges do in Maya or Blender. So if I want to select edges, for example, and map like this, and I go here to convert and say, wow, unwrap, I have to say quick peel. And notice that I used the window inside the UV editor and not these buttons. These are ancient pieces from the depths or something. I don't know, just forget this. The only button here that's usable is convert selection to seams. And this is the only way you can use max like you do the other programs with this button right here, and then pressing quick peer under here. Not peer mode, not reset peer, nothing like that. Just keep these buttons on and everything will be okay. And now you can say relax again or relax until flat, and you have this. And you can say rotate, introduce some padding, and press all these buttons again until you're satisfied. And press this again so it updates, and we have an equivalent of a well unwrapped mesh. Now let me go back again to the craziness from before by pressing this, and I'll show you another method. So here in the explode there is flatten by polygon angle, which if I press, this happens. I can adjust threshold here, undo, and you would think that this would do something, but it didn't. You would think that right clicking it would do something, but it doesn't. You would think that holding click down on it would do something, but it doesn't. So maybe you can use this as a base and then start welding the seams again. Or you planned your mesh well from the start, and you can use this button by selecting everything and go say flatten by smoothing groups, and then a miracle happens and you have your hard edges all made into seams, and you can unwrap them, unfold them like this, and if I press escape it stops, yet it has to be pressed per island, so I have 3. Now I have this, and if I back again, I go back where I wanted to be, and I can go into edge mode, and let's say I want this to be stitched for some weird reason. Don't ask. Maybe that's how I like it now. And this is my island. I say average, I say pack custom, normalize, and it's all good. Okay. Now there is another option here. If you saw from before, I'll just remove my view like this. So if you remember from before, there were 2 materials here. So now if I, for example, if I select ID here and said 1, I selected ID 1, I can create flatten by material ID. Or if I choose everything and say that, it will make 2 islands because I have 2 materials on this. And I can unwrap again, unfold using these buttons. And I have this. So you can plan or use unwrapping like that as well. And you can also select manually faces. Now I'm selecting by angle here. So let me just crank this up and select everything like this and say, okay, I want this to be an island. I say break. And I broke it off. Unfold, unwrap again until I'm satisfied. Pack, and so on. We also have align options here, so let me just select these edges and say align vertically to pivot, or let's say align to edge, or let's say I want these and say line horizontally, or linear align, or rotate around, pivot. Space horizontally, so I have an even edge spacing here. Space vertically, and so on. So these are the align options. You can ignore this paint option. It can be useful sometimes when unwrapping, but now it's already unwrapped. So maybe if I go back to the state where I say this is a single island, which I can't make with these buttons, but I select everything and do it like this. And if you say flat custom, you can configure it here for the angle threshold. So if I go up here, for example, it will flatten everything under that. Let's say 11, and it created this craziness. So let me just go back here and try to use this brush. And you can move stuff around like this, or relax things like this, and this is kind of a manual unwrap. So now it's unwrapping by painting. You can adjust the fall off here if you keep the button pressed. But I don't really recommend this unless you want to tweak something manually. You can also create groups by using these buttons, and for example, if you want, let's say, let me just unwrap this real quick properly. Or actually like this. So you saw me, I absolutely always keep pressing again and again. Now Max is really fun for non-square textures. So you see my grid here. I think it's made up of 20 squares horizontally and vertically, so it's a 20 by 20 grid. And now if I want everything to fit just in half, I select everything and say scale on one axis by unclicking this L button here, and I say 50, which means 50%. And now I can have a long texture like this, which is half the resolution of the square. And I can also move my texture along the coordinates here if I need to be precise in my unwrapping. So that's kind of it. When you're satisfied with everything, you either leave it like this and apply an editable or an edit poly modifier on top, or just collapse to, and the polygons are saved. For UV sets, for example, I will go into the UV unwrap modifier again. For UV sets, we have this channel map here. So where it says channel, you say it's map channel 1. If I open UV editor, we see channel 1. If I go to channel 2, Max will ask me what to do with channel 1. So I can move this to the next channel, and it will create a copy of it. So channel 2 doesn't exist, which is UV channel 1 in this case, because the first one would be 0. So if I click move, it copies and creates 2 UV channels identical to this one. And if I say abandon, it won't care about this one, and we will end up with an unwrapped version. And we have to unwrap this again. and maybe channel 2 looks like this, and I'll just unwrap it as so. Maybe I'll just put this here for good measure to know the difference. I have to collapse it to save it, and now I have two UV channels which are displayed nowhere. And if I go to unwrap UVW, I open the UV editor, I see channel 1 as I left it. And if I go to channel 2, the pop-up menu appears again. And if I move it, it will copy and overwrite the second channel. So I don't want that. I say abandon. And I'm looking at channel 2, which I saved from before. If I go back to channel 1, it will always ask me the same question, and I say abandon. Now, if I say move, let's go back to channel 2 and I say move. This is channel 2 now, and it was overwritten because if I go back and say abandon, and if I go back to channel 2 and say abandon again, it actually didn't overwrite it for some reason. But that's good, because if you want to overwrite it, let's say I go back to channel 1 and go abandon and go back to channel 2 and say move. Now this is channel 2 for sure. If I want to overwrite it, I have to collapse my modifier again, add the modifier again to look at my UVs and say map channel 2 abandon, so I'm not moving it, and this is channel 2 now, because before I moved it, then collapsed it, which it saved channel 2's information, and we're looking at channel 2. So this mesh has two UV channels, which you cannot know of unless you made them, as far as I know. So that's all. When you're done, collapse, and you have UVs. That's UVing in Max. Enjoy. To UV unwrap in Blender, just select your mesh and either create a UV editor window right here, or just go to this UV editing panel, which will be the same thing. If you go into edit mode and select anything, you will see that there are default UVs that the object had. You can ignore these, and if you observe, if you click, only what is selected will appear here, so you have to activate UV sync selection like this. Now everything will be visible. Ignore this for now, because we don't have an unwrap. To unwrap things, you just press U and select unwrap. But since there are no themes, it won't help much. Now, if I want to create themes, I just select my edges that I want, just like Maya, and right click, mark theme. All the themes are marked in red. I'll just relax this for simplicity's sake. And finish creating my UVs. So now I have these themes. Select all, press U to unwrap, and now Blender created this unwrap for me. If I want to create straight things in Blender, I can select one of these faces and make them active, or shift select, and whatever last selected is active. I'll position it so it seems as straight as possible. Let's say this is quite straight, but I'm not sure it is, so what I'll do is select these edges, go up here, say align X, or sorry, Y. Now repeat this here, right click, do the same thing, align X, repeat this here, and now I'm sure that this is perfectly square, or at least has straight edges. Now if I select everything and this is white, I can right click and say follow active quads. Now it created square UVs for me. I go up here to the UV panel, say pack islands. It will ask me what options I want. I don't like to rotate things. Just scale them and I'll say okay. Of course, this is quite a simple UV island in the UV setup, so may not be the best example, but I don't need anything complicated to explain what's here because nothing's complicated about UVs in general. If you say pack islands, you can adjust the padding space here, render colors margins. It says space between islands. Let me just copy this object a few times like this. And now I select everything, go into edit mode, select everything again, say pack islands. Okay, and now I have a margin of 0. If you're using older versions of Blender, this margin update will be live. But since 3.6 or somewhere after, the packing changed, so you can't do that anymore. So if I say select islands, and I'll insert a margin of, let's say, 24 pixels. Now I have some nice space between my UV islands. And basically that's how you UV in Blender. If you want to pin things, go into vertex mode, select, and you'll notice that just like in Maya, Blender also has a UV mode and a vertex mode, which are different to each other. So in vertex mode, if I select this vertex on the mesh, it doesn't matter if I select it on the mesh or in the UV editor, because if sync is on, it will consider this as a as a vertex, not a UV. If I turn sync off and select everything, and then go to the UV editor and click whatever, and select the same vertex again, now it will consider it as a UV, and not a vertex in itself. So when sync is on, it's a vertex. When sync is off, it's a UV vertex. Same thing applies for faces. So if sync is off like this, and I select something, let's say this group, it will stretch my connected edges like this. I right clicked on the. Now if sync is on, and I select the same faces, and I move them, it breaks them apart. So I can move them wherever. Let's say I move this square piece because I want it as an island. And now, even if I don't have any seams, it doesn't matter because this is just a thing inside Blender. If I export this, it will be exactly as we see it here in the UV editor, even if there is no seam here in Blender. If I want to create seam out of islands like this, I can also unwrap them separately. So if I press U here for the selected parts, it will unwrap everything. And now if I want to make it the same size, I select everything and say average island scale, and of course back again. And now it made it as such because this is the small part. As you can see the object here. And if I want to add the seams to it for later use, I can just say select everything, UV, seams from islands. And now it made seams around this island. That's also very helpful sometimes. Now if I just want to pin, I select the words and say pin, or just press P. And if I want to unpin, I press Alt P. When any vertex is pinned, it turns red. So it's like this. So if you have red vertices, know that you have pinned vertices. And you have to right click and unpin, or Alt P, or go up here, and so on. Explore this menu. It's very basic and the equivalent to everything else you've ever seen on how UVing is done in any other software. In Blender, there is no optimize, unfold, or unwrap, but you have different ways of unwrapping. So let's say I choose this and say unwrap again, and it unwraps it like this. If I go down here to this window and say it says angle based at this moment with fill horizon, correct aspect, and so on. If I press this again because I unticked correct aspect, sometimes it unwraps it differently. But if I choose conformal from this list, it for sure will unwrap it differently. So sometimes you want to use this one or the other one. It depends on your situation and how it will give you your UVs. You should try them both. It can be useful. You also have this view to view stretching. Up here you say display stretch. And now you have this view where you can view stretching. That's all. And to find UV sets, you go here where it says UV map in the object data properties, and this is set 1. If you want to add a new UV set, just press plus. It will copy the one existing, and if you want to view it, you should go and press this camera. Now let's say set 2. Oh, sorry. Well, you can name it whatever you want, of course. And if I go here and unwrap again, now I have set 2 like this and set 1 like this. What we're seeing here is not a bug or an issue. It's actually the fact that I have 5 separate objects, so these are all separate. And because of that, I only selected and did the process on the main one, or this one. And if I go here, this one does not have a UV set extra. So whatever I did before has only applied it to this active object. I can't create multiple UV sets with multiple objects selected like this. So even if I do press the plus icon, it only created one on the active one, which is this light orange, and not on the red one like this. So that's why that happened. If you want to make multiple UV sets for multiple items, even if you can do one set for each of them, you have to create a UV set separately for each and then unwrap it again on that channel. Or even better, just join them all, do your thing. Blender doesn't delete any UV set that was created from all of them, or if they have different names. So you can see that it kept all of the sets even from the other objects, not like Maya does, which destroys everything when you do this. And then do your thing, have one set like this, the other set like this, and so on. And then just separate your objects again if you need them like that, and it's done.